room was silent except for the slow, rhythmic creak of the ceiling fan. Former FBI agent Daniel Mercer stood in the doorway, gripping the Glock 19 in his right hand, his knuckles white with tension. His breath was slow and controlled, the way it had been during countless high-stakes operations. But this was different. This was personal. His wife, Olivia, lay entangled in the sheets with a man Daniel didn't recognize. Naked, vulnerable, lost in the deep sleep of those who had exhausted themselves in passion. The bedside clock glowed, 2:47 a.m., in dim red digits, mocking him. He had been in 100 shootouts, had taken down the worst criminals, but nothing had prepared him for this. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet ever could. His mind should have been racing, but it wasn't. Everything felt cold, mechanical, like the way he used to clear a room during raids. No hesitation, no emotion, just action. The weight of the gun felt familiar, almost comforting. His left hand steadied under his right, aligning the sights. His breathing timed perfectly with his heartbeat. One shot. The silencer muffled the blast, but the impact was immediate. The bullet tore through the man's temple, splattering the headboard with red. Olivia gasped awake, her scream cut off as Daniel turned the gun on her. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Daniel, please." Another shot. The room went silent again, except for the dripping of blood onto the wooden floor. He stood there for a moment, the gun still raised, watching the life fade from her eyes. He should have felt something. Anger, sadness, regret. But there was nothing. Just the dull, numbing realization that his life as he knew it was over. He walked to the bathroom, turned on the sink, and methodically washed his hands. The blood swirled down the drain in delicate red ribbons, disappearing into the abyss. He stared at himself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes. But something was different now. The next step was crucial. He had spent years hunting criminals. He knew how mistakes got people caught. He couldn't afford mistakes. First, the cleanup. He pulled the sheets off the bed, wrapped Olivia's body in them, and rolled the stranger in the comforter. He dragged them both into the bathroom, leaving a faint streak of blood on the floor. Nothing a little bleach wouldn't fix. The disposal had to be methodical. His cabin in the woods, 2 hours north of here, had a deep well that hadn't been used in years. It was the perfect spot. He loaded the bodies into the trunk of his car, layering them under bags of cement he had bought months ago for a patio he never got around to building. The drive was long and quiet, the hum of the tires on asphalt the only sound. The world outside was still and indifferent. No sirens, no alarms, just the cool night air whispering through the cracked window. At the cabin, he worked quickly. He lowered the bodies into the well, one at a time, their weight sinking into the darkness. The bags of cement followed, then water from the old pump. It would harden overnight, sealing them in a tomb no one would ever think to check. By dawn, he was back in his house, scrubbing the floor with industrial bleach, burning the sheets in the backyard fire pit, erasing every trace of what had happened. He cleaned methodically, like he was processing a crime scene. Because he was. His own. He stepped back, surveying his work. It was done. No loose ends, no evidence. And yet, as he sat in the kitchen, drinking his morning coffee like it was any other day, he felt it creeping in. The weight, the silence, the realization that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. But there was no turning back now. The coffee was bitter, scalding his tongue, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind was already moving ahead, running scenarios, calculating risks. He had covered his tracks well, but paranoia was an old friend, whispering doubts in his ear. Had he missed something? A stray hair? A footprint? He forced himself to breathe, to stay logical. No one would come looking. Olivia had distanced herself from friends over the years. The man just another nameless affair, no connections, no reason for anyone to dig. Still, he couldn't shake the unease. He needed an alibi. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His former partner, Mike. They hadn't spoken in months, but that was exactly why it would work. He hit dial. "Dan?" Mike's voice was groggy. "What the hell, man? It's early." "And sorry, brother. I was thinking about the old days. Felt like catching up. Got time for breakfast?" A pause, then a chuckle. "You?" "Yeah, why not? Same diner? See you in an hour." Daniel hung up and glanced at the clock. 7:12 a.m. He showered, letting the hot water strip away the scent of bleach and smoke. By the time he pulled into the diner parking lot, he looked like any other man starting his day. Mike was already there, sipping black coffee, flipping through the newspaper. He looked up as Daniel slid into the booth. "So, what's the occasion?" Daniel forced a smile. "Just reminiscing." Mike smirked. "That usually means trouble." Daniel laughed. But something in his chest tightened. Trouble had already found him, and he wasn't sure if he'd buried it deep enough. The coffee smelled rich, the scent blending with the faint aroma of frying bacon and syrup. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm mug, watching the steam rise. Mike studied him for a moment, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Years of working together had built an instinct between them, an ability to read each other without words. "You look like hell," Mike finally said, leaning back in the booth. Daniel forced a smirk. "Thanks. Feels good to see you too." Mike shook his head. "Nah, I mean it. You've got that look, the one you used to get after a bad case." He took a slow sip of his coffee, then set it down. "Something eating you?" Daniel shrugged, keeping his expression neutral. "Just thinking about the past, how everything turned out, how fast life changes." Mike nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "Yeah? One minute you're chasing down cartel guys, next thing you know you're fixing leaks in the damn kitchen sink. Retirement is a joke, man." Daniel chuckled, playing along. "You miss it?" "Hell no. But I miss the purpose, the clarity. These days everything feels foggy." Daniel understood that feeling all too well. His entire life had been about order, structure, knowing right from wrong. Until last night. Until the moment he had pulled the trigger. Now, everything felt off balance. Like he was walking on thin ice, waiting for the cracks to spread. Mike waved a waitress over and ordered eggs and toast. Daniel did the same, though he knew he wouldn't eat much. He just needed to sit here, to be seen, to cement this moment into reality. An alibi wasn't just about time. It was about presence. As they waited for their food, Mike leaned in. "You ever hear about that guy in Texas? Former cop. Caught his wife cheating, killed her and the guy, then just disappeared?" Daniel kept his expression blank, but his pulse spiked. "Disappeared?" "Yeah. No body, no crime scene, nothing. Just up and vanished. Some say he ran to Mexico, others think he buried them deep. Never found a trace." Mike sipped his coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Reminds me of something you'd be capable of if you ever lost it." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "That a compliment or a warning?" Mike smirked. "Bit of both." The conversation shifted after that, moving into old stories from their FBI days. Daniel let himself relax, playing the part, nodding at the right moments, even laughing where it fit. But underneath it all, he was still listening for any hint that something was out of place. By the time they finished breakfast, it was nearly 9 a.m. The world outside was bright and normal, people walking their dogs, running errands, living their lives. Mike stretched and tossed some bills on the table. "We should do this more often. Retirement is dull as hell." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, let's." As he walked to his car, he scanned the parking lot, his old habits kicking in. No unmarked cars, no lingering eyes. Everything seemed fine. But paranoia doesn't go away easily. He drove home slowly, watching the rearview mirror for too long, analyzing every car that stayed behind him for more than a few blocks. Nothing. He forced himself to breathe, to stay steady. Back at the house, everything was exactly as he had left it. The faint scent of bleach still lingered, but nothing that would raise suspicion. The sheets were gone, the blood was scrubbed, and the fire pit in the backyard was nothing but cooling ash. He had done everything right. And yet, he walked into the bedroom staring at the spot where they had died. His mind replayed the moment in brutal detail. Her gasp, the way her eyes widened, the silence that followed. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like something unfinished. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. He hesitated before answering. "Yeah?" A pause, then a voice he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mercer?" Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Who's this?" The voice was calm, measured. "You don't know me, but I know you. And I know what you did last night." Daniel's blood went cold. He forced his voice to stay even. "I think you have the wrong number." The man chuckled softly. "Come on, Daniel. You were always smarter than that." Daniel's mind raced. A witness? Someone he had missed? No. He had checked everything, covered every angle. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. There was another pause, then the man spoke again. "Meet me at the old docks, 1 hour, alone, or the cops get a very interesting phone call." The line went dead. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. His first instinct was to run, change identities, disappear off the grid like he had seen so many fugitives do. But he wasn't a fugitive. Not yet. He was a hunter, and someone had just put themselves in his crosshairs. He grabbed his coat, slipped his gun into the holster beneath it, and headed for the door. This wasn't over, not even close. Daniel drove with steady hands, but his mind was already running ahead, calculating possibilities. Who was the caller? A witness? A blackmailer? Maybe someone connected to the man he had killed? He had done everything right. There shouldn't have been any loose ends. The old docks were abandoned, a forgotten part of the city where rusting containers sat in rows, silent and empty. He pulled in slowly, scanning the area. No other cars, no movement, just the sound of distant waves slapping against the pilings. He stepped out, his coat heavy with the weight of the Glock hidden beneath it. His instinct screamed trap, but he had no choice. He had to know who was watching him. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. A man in his late 40s, dressed in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets. His stance was too relaxed, too confident. He wasn't afraid. Daniel squared his shoulders. "I'm here. Talk." The man smirked. "Straight to business. I like that." He took a slow step forward. "You're good, Mercer. Real good. But you missed one thing." Daniel's pulse remained steady. "And what's that?" The man pulled a phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. A video played. Grainy, night vision footage of Daniel dragging the bodies to his car. The angle was high, maybe a security camera from a neighboring house he hadn't noticed. Daniel's jaw tightened. The man tilted his head. "See, I don't work for the cops. If I did, you'd already be in cuffs. No, I have a different kind of offer." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Go on." The man smiled. "You're going to do a job for me, Mercer, or this video goes public." Daniel's grip tightened. The game had changed, and now he was playing someone else's. Daniel sat in his dimly lit living room, the whiskey glass cool in his grip. The crushed flash drive lay on the table, its remains nothing more than shards of plastic and circuitry. It should have felt like closure, but it didn't. He had covered his tracks. The bodies were gone, the evidence erased, and the only person who knew his secret was now rotting at the docks. By all logic, he was free. And yet, something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. A quiet paranoia whispering in the back of his mind. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He let it ring. Then a message came through. No text, just a single image. His cabin in the woods, the well. Someone knew. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the glass. It was never over. It was just beginning.